What if the greatest emotional trap is the one that feels most like love you give? You explain, you apologize, you try again. Not because you're weak, but because somewhere deep down, you believe that keeping her happy is the only way to be loved back. Have you ever stayed silent just to avoid a storm you did cause? Have you ever tried everything, flowers, words, space, and still felt like something was always your fault? This isn't love. It's emotional confusion. And the worst part, you've been trained to think this is normal. If you've ever walked on eggshells, if you've ever felt like her silence was louder than any scream, if you've ever asked yourself, what did I do wrong? This video will change everything. Because there's something I discovered, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Thank you for being here. And I hope you stay until the end. There's a war most men never see, not because it's hidden in shadows, but because it wears the mask of something beautiful. You're told to be kind, to be patient, to listen, to give. And when she pulls away, you pull closer. When she grows cold, you get warmer. When she cries, you blame yourself. You were trained for this. From songs to stories to every soft-spoken whisper that said, "A good man always makes her smile." But what if that very script is why so many men feel lost today? What if the enemy isn't her? What if the enemy is blindness? Let's go back thousands of years to a man named Socrates, a philosopher, a question asker, a truth seeker. He didn't write self-help. He didn't post quotes online. He studied people deeply. And what he saw shook him. He saw men break down not from war, but from emotional confusion. He saw women hold power not through force, but through silence, through subtle distance, through unspoken moods that could bend even the strongest men. And when he spoke about it, he wasn't bitter, he wasn't angry, he was awake. He once said, "By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll be happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher." Most people laugh, they think it's just a joke. But Socrates wasn't joking, he was warning, because when love is clear, it brings peace. But when love is emotional warfare, it teaches you to question everything. And that's how philosophy begins, not in a classroom, but in a kitchen, in a cold bedroom, in a silent dinner where you can feel the temperature drop, but you don't know why, where every word you say feels wrong, where every silence feels louder than your thoughts. And suddenly, you're not a man in love, you're a man in confusion. That's the war. And that's what most men were never taught to see. They think love is about earning peace, but sometimes peace is the leash. And the moment you start chasing it, you've already lost yourself. So what do? You start with the truth. No blame, no hatred, just awareness. Because once you can see the strings, you're no longer the puppet. And once you understand what Socrates saw, you'll never chase the same way again. You'll love, but not blindly. You'll feel, but not be ruled. And most of all, you'll stop being afraid of the storm, because you'll realize it's not hers to fix. It's yours to stop dancing in. She said nothing, but everything changed. The way she placed her phone down, the way her eyes didn't meet mine, the way the room just went cold. I asked, "What's wrong?" She smiled. "Nothing." But I felt it, the shift, the storm gathering behind silence. That was the first time I noticed how I moved to fix something that hadn't even been named. Her silence became my signal. Her distance became my guilt. And slowly, without her saying a word, I began to bend. That was Ethan, 31, high school teacher, smart, soft-spoken, raised right. He thought love meant always being the steady one, always calming her storms, always being her peace. But what no one told Ethan was that always fixing things is how you start to break. It began with small things. She'd get quiet. He'd bring flowers. She'd sigh at the dinner table. He'd cancel plans. She'd cry over something unrelated. He'd apologize for something he didn't even do. And over time, he became less of a man and more of a mirror, always adjusting, always reflecting, never centered. This isn't weakness, it's programming. Men like Ethan were taught that love is earned by sacrifice, that if she's unhappy, it must be his fault, that keeping her smiling is the sign of success. But what if that very idea is the cage? You see, Ethan wasn't being abused. There were no fights, no screaming, no slamming doors, just quiet shifts, unspoken rules, emotional climates he was expected to adjust to without a weather report. And when he didn't adjust fast enough, he felt it in the air, he felt it in his stomach. He felt it in the way she looked away just 1 second longer than usual. So he tried harder, he shrank more, he spoke less, all to keep the temperature warm. But here's the truth: he wasn't protecting love. He was chasing approval. He wasn't staying strong, he was staying silent. And every time she pulled back emotionally, he pulled himself apart. Here's where it gets dangerous. The more he gave to keep her close, the more power she had to control his peace. She didn't have to shout, she didn't have to threaten, all she had to do was stop smiling. And he'd spiral, not because she was cruel, not because she planned it, but because the pattern worked. That's emotional conditioning, and most men never see it because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like love, like care, like being a good man. But it's not. It's emotional obedience. It's the quiet death of your own truth. So if you've ever felt this, if you've ever found yourself asking, did I do something wrong, but couldn't find the answer, you're not alone, and you're not crazy. You were just trained to believe that peace in a relationship is more important than truth in yourself. But what if there's another way? What if the first step isn't fixing her mood, but observing your own? If that feels like something you've lived through, comment, I've been there. You're not the only one, and what comes next might just change everything. Centuries before Ethan ever questioned himself, there was another man watching storms in silence. Not weather storms, emotional ones, and he didn't try to stop them, he studied them. His name was Socrates. Most know him as a philosopher, a thinker, but few realize he was also a husband. And his wife Xanthippe was known for her temper, sharp words, loud emotions, sudden moods. People mocked Socrates for staying with her. Why does a wise man live with such a difficult woman? But what they didn't see was that Socrates wasn't suffering, he was learning. He once said, I married her because I wanted to understand human nature. Let that sink in. He didn't run from her chaos, he let it teach him. He noticed things others ignored. The way power didn't always come through force. The way emotions could command a room without ever raising a voice. He watched how silence could provoke more fear than words, how disapproval could feel like punishment, how unpredictability could tame even the strongest minds. But most importantly, he watched what happened to men who didn't know what they were seeing. He saw them shrink, apologize, overcompensate, chase peace at the cost of their presence. And that's when he realized the real battlefield is not in arguments. It's in atmosphere. It's not in what she says. It's in how she withdraws. And the moment a man connects her mood to his sense of identity, she gains the ability to control him without lifting a finger. Socrates didn't call this evil, he called it unexamined. Because when men fail to examine how emotion works around them, they become ruled by it, and they call that love. But love isn't silent obedience, it's presence, it's awareness, it's truth. Even when truth is uncomfortable, Socrates never said, don't love women. He said, observe. Observe when her moods shift, observe your urge to fix, observe your need to please. Because only when you see clearly can you love freely, not from fear, not from guilt, but from clarity. Ethan had never heard of Xanthippe. He didn't know Socrates lived through the same emotional tides he was drowning in. But if he had, he might have felt less alone. And he might have understood that what he was facing wasn't personal, it was ancient. Because long before phones, texts, and I'm fine messages, men have been walking this invisible minefield. And only those who stop and truly see the pattern make it out whole. So what did Socrates do? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't escape. He didn't try to make her different. He made himself clear, calm, still. While the world around him shifted, he stood, and maybe, just maybe, that's why he became the wisest man in Athens. Not because he had all the answers, but because he stopped reacting to every question. Before Ethan ever met her, he was already in love. Not with a person, but with an idea. It started young, Saturday morning cartoons, fairy tales before bed, romantic comedies playing while his parents argued in the next room. Every story whispered the same message, that one day the right woman would appear, and everything would finally make sense. She'd be gentle, understanding, soft-spoken, beautiful, patient. She'd get him, support him, fix the broken pieces. And so Ethan waited. And while he waited, he built her in his mind. Every heartbreak, every silent night was just another reminder that she hadn't arrived yet. He didn't question the fantasy, he worshipped it because it gave him hope, it gave him direction, it gave him something to chase when life didn't make sense. So when he finally met someone who smiled just right, who laughed at his jokes, who leaned in when he spoke, he handed her the crown. He didn't know her, not really. But she fit the image, and that was enough. The problem wasn't her. The problem was the pedestal. He expected peace. He expected ease. He expected warmth always. And when that didn't happen, he blamed himself. Because the fantasy never showed difficulty, it only promised salvation. So when she got moody, he thought, I must have failed. When she pulled away, he thought, I'm not good enough. When things felt off, he doubled his efforts, more gifts, more patience, more silence, all to protect the image, the dream, the illusion. But here's the truth, you can't love a fantasy, you can only perform for it. And the more he performed, the less he saw her, the less he saw himself. He ignored red flags, he explained away manipulation. He called chaos passion and withdrawal space. Not because he was naive, but because he was loyal to the dream he built as a boy. A dream sold to him by every movie, song, and well-meaning lie that told him love would fix everything. But real love doesn't rescue, it reveals. It shows your insecurities, your wounds, your deepest fears. And if you're not ready to see those, you'll keep running back to the comfort of fantasy. So Ethan stayed, not because he was weak, but because he still believed that with enough love she would become the version he imagined. But she wasn't an idea, she was a person. Flawed, emotional, human. And no one can compete with perfection if that perfection lives in your head, so the real trap wasn't her. It was the picture he painted of her. And every time she acted outside that picture, he didn't adjust the painting, he blamed himself. That's what most men do. They don't fall in love with reality. They fall in love with the relief they hope love will bring. But here's the heartbreak no one talks about. You can't build peace on top of a lie. And eventually, even the most beautiful illusion starts to crack. It didn't happen with a fight. There were no harsh words, no accusations, no storm, just a shift. One morning she woke up quieter, didn't hug him like usual, didn't smile when he made coffee, didn't look up when he left the room. And that was enough to make Ethan spiral inside, enough to make him question everything. Had he said something wrong, forgotten a special date, missed a sign? He replayed the last few days in his head, over and over, searching for the mistake. But she never said anything when he asked, "Are you okay?" She replied, "I'm fine." 2 words, and 1,000 echoes. He didn't believe her, but he didn't dare press. Instead, he adjusted. Again, he canceled plans, bought her favorite wine, cleaned the house top to bottom, made dinner, waited for her mood to lift. It didn't. And in that waiting, Ethan realized something disturbing. She didn't need to raise her voice to get him to change. She just needed to withdraw. That was the real weapon, emotional distance. One moment warm, affectionate, engaged. The next cool, distant, unreadable. And Ethan, like many men, was never trained for this. He knew how to fight fire, but no one told him how to survive the cold. Because silence doesn't give you something to argue against. It gives you emptiness. It gives you space to self-destruct. And so he filled that space with guilt, with overthinking, with silent panic. He tried harder, gave more, became smaller, all in the hope that warmth would return. But here's the dark truth. The more she saw her silence could shift his world, the more power she held without lifting a finger. She didn't do it maliciously. She may not have even realized it, but it worked. And emotional power doesn't need intention. It only needs repetition. Every time he chased her mood, he made it easier for her to shape his. She became the thermostat, he became the sensor, always adjusting, always reacting. And the worst part, he thought that was love. But love doesn't feel like tension every morning. Love doesn't make you walk on eggshells before coffee. Love doesn't turn silence into punishment. This was something else. This was emotional conditioning. You see, when someone realizes they don't need to explain themselves to affect you, they learn control, not with words, but with temperature, with presence, or the lack of it. It's not abuse in the classic sense, but it chips away at you just the same. And the more you bend, the less you recognize yourself. Ethan didn't shout, didn't leave, didn't accuse. He just disappeared bit by bit, not from the relationship, but from himself. And if you've ever felt that subtle loss, that quiet erasure of who you were before you started trying to keep someone happy, you know exactly how deep it cuts. It doesn't leave scars on your skin, it leaves them on your spirit. And until you name it, it keeps repeating. So the question isn't, why does she act this way? The real question is, why have I accepted silence as leadership? Because the moment you confuse distance for depth, you lose your center. And once your peace depends on someone else's mood, your power is no longer yours. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand breaking point, no dramatic collapse, just erosion. Day by day, piece by piece, Ethan stopped being visible. At first, it was small. He stopped bringing up his opinions, not because he didn't have them, but because she'd roll her eyes or go quiet, or sigh just loud enough for him to hear. So he adjusted. He skipped telling her when he disagreed. He said, "You're right," even when he wasn't sure. He let her choose the movie, the restaurant, the rhythm of their days, not out of love, but out of fear that resistance meant rejection. Then came the next layer. He stopped sharing how he felt. If he had a hard day, he kept it in. If something bothered him, he brushed it off. He became a quiet man in a relationship full of noise. And when friends asked how things were going, he smiled and said, "We're good." But deep down, he wasn't sure who we was anymore. There was no big fight, no betrayal, no visible reason to leave, but he was vanishing. He no longer recognized the man in the mirror. He looked like himself, sounded like himself. But inside he was empty, not broken, not abused, just quietly erased. Every time she got upset, he felt responsible. Every time she withdrew, he worked harder. And the more he tried to please, the more he betrayed himself. He began walking through life like a man living for someone else's weather. If she was happy, he felt safe. If she was cold, he panicked. If she was neutral, he felt like he was failing. His inner world became a reflection of her moods, not his own choices. This is how men disappear, not through loss of love, but through loss of self. And what makes it so tragic is that no one ever told them it was happening. Because from the outside, he looked like a great boyfriend, supportive, patient, loving, but inside he was becoming a ghost that cleaned the kitchen, a ghost that texted good morning before she woke up, a ghost that said I'm sorry before knowing what he was apologizing for. And that's the cruel irony. He didn't leave her, he left himself. And she never even noticed, because ghosts don't make noise. Ethan had become the man society praises, the one who always listens, never complains, keeps the peace. But peace built on suppression isn't peace, it's pressure, and pressure, when silent, becomes collapse. There's a moment in every man's journey when he has to ask himself, is this really who I wanted to be? Not loud, not dominant, just real. And for Ethan, that moment hadn't come yet, but it was close. Because every time he bit his tongue, something inside him bit back. And soon, the silence he'd used to survive would be the very thing that forced him to wake up. It was a Thursday, cloudy, quiet, nothing dramatic. She didn't text him that morning, no good morning, no heart emoji, just silence. And he felt it like always, that familiar ache in the chest, that quiet panic, that reflex to fix, to chase, to ask, did I do something wrong? But this time he didn't. Ethan sat with the discomfort, felt every inch of that emotional tension pulling at his need to be approved, to be loved, to be reassured. And he did nothing. He didn't text her, didn't ask questions, didn't scramble to become what she needed. He breathed. For the first time, he let her distance be hers, not his fault, not his burden. It wasn't easy. It felt like withdrawal, like quitting a drug, like losing oxygen. But underneath the anxiety was stillness. And in that stillness, he remembered who he was. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He wasn't a fixer. He wasn't a mood mirror. He was a man with a center, a spine, a soul. He went to work, taught his students, ate lunch without checking his phone 100 times. And when he got home, she was there, waiting, curious, a little surprised. "Rough day?" she asked. He smiled. "Not really." That was the day everything changed. Not because she changed. Not because the relationship suddenly became perfect, but because Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't bend to win her back. He didn't react to her storm. He became the calm. And something strange happened. She softened. She leaned in. She asked him questions. She smiled. Not because he chased her into it, but because he gave her space to come to him. This is what most men never discover. When you stop reacting, you regain gravity. You become the one who sets the emotional tone. Not because you force it, but because you no longer lose yourself when the air gets cold. Emotional leadership isn't about control, it's about clarity. It's about anchoring, so when she drifts, you don't follow, you remain. When she goes silent, you don't speak out of panic, you wait out of peace. Because her moods are hers, and your mind is yours. That moment, that Thursday, was the first time Ethan saw how powerful stillness could be. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like return to himself, to sanity, to balance, and she noticed, not because he made a speech, But because for the first time in a long time he wasn't waiting for her to define the moment, he defined it with presence, with patience, with power, and in doing so he became someone no silence could shake. It didn't feel like a victory. There was no applause, no fireworks, just a shift, subtle, but irreversible. Ethan didn't suddenly become a new man. He didn't grow cold. He didn't build walls, he simply stopped disappearing. He still loved her, still cared, still listened, but no longer at the cost of himself. That was the difference. He realized love wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a test he had to keep passing. It wasn't a tightrope walk of pleasing and guessing and fixing. It was presence. And presence starts from within, so he did the work, not to win her, not to keep her, but to remember himself. He went back to the gym not to impress, but to feel his strength again. He called old friends not to escape, but to reconnect with the man he used to be. He picked up his journal, wrote out everything he had swallowed in silence for months. And the more he reclaimed, the less he needed her moods to feel secure. It wasn't about detachment. It was about sovereignty, because emotional freedom doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop negotiating your self-worth every time someone else changes their tone. And as Ethan rebuilt, she noticed. She noticed he wasn't rushing to fix her feelings, wasn't trying to fill every quiet moment with solutions, wasn't flinching at the first sign of discomfort. At first, it confused her, then it calmed her, because she could finally feel him, not the performer, not the people-pleaser, but the man, grounded, honest, unshaken. And in that space, something beautiful began to grow. A new kind of connection, one not built on dependency or emotional reflexes, but on clarity. He no longer feared her silence, he mastered his. He no longer saw her mood as a test, he saw it as information. He no longer walked on eggshells, he walked with presence, and slowly their rhythm changed. Not because he told her to change, but because he stopped being part of the game. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing peace through others, you begin to create it within yourself. And once that peace is real, others can feel it. They either rise to meet it or fall away from it. Either way, you stay steady. This is the man most never become, not because they can't, but because they never stop long enough to ask, what am I building this love on? Is it clarity or confusion, strength or sacrifice, truth or performance? Ethan had spent years mistaking self-erasure for love. Now he understood something deeper. Real love honors both people, not just one. And if that balance doesn't exist, then what you're calling love might just be fear with flowers on top. Socrates never wrote a book. He never left behind a scroll of rules, no 10 steps to inner peace, no formula for love, but he left something better, a way of seeing. He questioned everything, not to be difficult, but to get to the root. Of pain, of power, of people. He watched how humans behaved when they were in love, when they were insecure, when they were hungry for validation. And he noticed something few dared to say out loud. The one who controls the emotional tone controls the relationship. It wasn't about domination, it was about awareness. And Socrates was deeply aware. He lived it. He had Xanthippe, the wife others warned him about, sharp, emotional, unpredictable. But instead of resenting her, he watched her, not to trap her, but to free himself. He realized her moods didn't define his truth. Her storms didn't have to sink his ship. Her silence wasn't his signal to beg. It was data, not a demand. This is what he tried to teach men, not to fear women, not to avoid love, but to stop being blind, to stop giving emotional power away to anyone who simply changes energy in a room. Because love, without awareness, it turns into obedience. And when a man lives in obedience to emotion, not just hers, but anyone's, he loses his mind long before he ever loses the relationship. Socrates never said these things to insult. He said them to awaken, because he saw what many still don't, that a man without internal clarity becomes a tool for external control. Society didn't want that message, still doesn't, because a man who sees through illusions can't be manipulated with guilt, can't be shaken by tears, can't be controlled by silence, not because he lacks compassion, but because he has vision. And vision is dangerous to systems that rely on confusion. Ethan never read Socrates, not in school, not online, but he lived the lesson anyway. He discovered through pain that love without clarity is just chaos with perfume on it. And clarity doesn't come from running away, it comes from standing still, watching, listening, feeling, not hers, yours, your gut, your center, your truth. Socrates became a philosopher not because he had the answers, but because he stopped accepting the lies. And maybe that's all it takes, not wisdom in a robe, but a man in a kitchen choosing not to chase the mood of the moment, choosing to breathe instead of beg, to feel instead of fix, to see instead of serve. Ethan found his strength in silence, not hers, but his own. And that's when he finally understood what Socrates meant. If you get a good partner, you'll be happy. But if you get a difficult one, you'll have the chance to wake up. And what begins as heartbreak might just be the start of real wisdom. If you're still here, still listening, then this wasn't just a video, it was a mirror. And maybe for the first time, you saw something you couldn't unsee. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Maybe it wasn't yours either. Maybe the real problem was the silence between who you were and who you had to become just to keep her close. Maybe what hurt the most wasn't her distance, but how fast you ran toward it every time. They never taught you this, not in school, not at home, not in the movies that promised happily ever after if you just tried hard enough. But you tried, didn't you? You gave, you adjusted, you softened your voice, you silenced your needs, all for a love that never felt steady. And now here you are, not angry, not bitter, but awake. That matters more than you think. Because most men will keep walking in circles, loving blindly, apologizing for things they didn't do, calling emotional chaos passion, calling approval connection, calling silence peace. But not you, not anymore. Because once you see the pattern, you can't go back to pretending it's love. You stop chasing storms and start building shelter, not just for her. For you, you stop negotiating your self-worth with every shift in someone else's energy. You stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. And something amazing happens. You remember who you were before the emotional acrobatics, before the bending, before the begging. You remember what it's like to breathe fully, to speak clearly, to stand still while everything else moves around you. That's power, not force, not control, presence. The kind of presence that makes people feel safe, not because you're always agreeable, but because you're real. And now it's your turn, not to fix her, not to win her, not even to prove you're enough, but to become it quietly, daily, internally, because that's where the shift begins, not in the world, in you. And if this message stirred something inside you, if it made you pause, made you feel seen, made you want to rebuild, then don't let that fade. This isn't just a story, this is a call to stop chasing, to start seeing, to stop reacting, to start leading yourself first. The path ahead won't be easy. There will be moments you want to fold, to go back to comfort, to the illusion. But illusions don't hold you, they haunt you. Truth may feel sharp, but it frees you. So if you're ready, really ready, then welcome. Welcome to the beginning of your real life, your centered life, your sovereign life. This isn't self-help, this is self-ownership. And no one can take that from you, not anymore.